by Nat King Cole. You might have heard this about if you ever plan to motor west, travel my way, take the highway that's the best, get your kicks on Route 66. You ever wonder about this highway, how it got its start? More importantly, how it became an American icon with an international fan club. Currently we have Route 66 associations that are pretty active in Australia, Japan, Germany, Czech Republic, Netherlands, Belgium, UK, Italy, Brazil, Canada. They organize events, they organize tours, they write travel guides in various language. Here's a little bit of a thought for you, indicative of how big Route 66 is. Now, I can't verify this, but I understand that Route 66, according to a conference I went to, the World Monuments Fund, talking on Route 66, that Route 66 Shield is now more recognized internationally than Coca-Cola. And consider this, in 2018, I was privileged to speak and attend the European Route 66 Festival in Zlin, Czechia. And it's estimated that about 20,000 people turned out for that celebration from 10 countries. It's pretty astounding. After all, it's a road, for God's sakes. So, how did an American highway become a destination? More importantly, how did an American highway that officially hasn't existed since 1985 become an icon? How did it become a destination? This most famous highway officially disappeared on June 27th, 1985. Think about that. How many years have passed, and yet the road grows in popularity every year, and next year, the highway centennial events are being planned in almost every community along the highway, and people from all over the world are planning on attending. The story really begins with the bicycle. Uh, it's the bicycle really could be credited pretty easily for being the cornerstone for the U.S. highway system, including Route 66, and for the American auto industry. We really start in we started out with a penny farthing bicycles. That's the big bicycles with the large front wheel, small back wheel. When those came out initially in the mid 19th century, like the automobiles that would uh, precede them, they were considered play toys for the rich. But that didn't stop people from traveling with them. One fellow traveled around the world on a penny farthing. But in 1885, we had the invention of the modern bicycle. And all of a sudden, the price started coming down. Manufacturing became popular. They become an every man's mode of transportation. They were promoted as cheaper than a horse, easier to maintain than a horse, great personal transportation. A lot of the same arguments that would be made for the automobile. The infancy of the automobile mirrors the bicycle a lot. Initially, when the automobile came out, it was a plaything of the rich and famous, and people weren't even really sure what to do with an automobile. The Duryea brothers were the first company in the United States to begin manufacturing automobiles, called them motor wagons. They came out, started about 1893, 1894. And in 1896, a Duryea motor wagon was given top billing over the albino, the bearded lady, and the fat man. Montgomery Ward said that this was a curiosity that you needed to take the children to see before it passed. And yet, just at the same time, we're getting into the first automobile races. And by 1901, we had dozens and dozens of automobile companies, electric, steam, and gasoline powered automobiles. The Jackson Automobile Company, established in 1903 in Jackson, Michigan, they hedged their bets. They built steam cars as well as gasoline powered cars. The steam cars were marketed as Jacksons, Jaxon, And they promoted this because steam was easily understood. And they advertised and promoted their cars as being so easy to operate. A child or a woman could drive them. Not exactly politically correct. Uh, the first attempt to drive cross country was Alexander Winton in 1901. Alexander Winton was an automotive pioneer, manufacturing pioneer, and he started out. He was an immigrant, Scotch immigrant, and he had made his fortune with bicycles, and then he started with automobiles. And he wanted to prove the viability of automobiles. So in 1901, he took a journalist from Scientific American and attempted to drive from San Francisco. And it was a grueling adventure that collapsed out in Nevada. And the journalist noted that it wasn't because of a lack of durability of the vehicle or tenacity of the driver, it was a complete lack of roads. The first person to drive cross country was Dr. Horatio Jackson, and he did this in a Winton. Uh, I don't know if drinking was involved, but I can assume since he attempted this on a $50 bet, and he later joked that the trip had cost him about $8,000, but he won the $50 bet. That made him the winner. Early travelers, well into the teens, traveling was not for the faint of heart. This is the recommended gear in a 1919 travel guide for people planning to cross through the Southwest from California to the Grand Canyon or on to Santa Fe. Gives you an idea of what an incredible adventure this was in those years. This photo, by the way, from the Palace of the Governors, is La Beata Hill between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. This would have been on the National Old Trails Road. Believe it or not, this was an early alignment of Route 66. This fellow really intrigues me. Being a fellow that's looking, I'm almost 70 years of age, and dealing with rapidly changing technologies and societal changes is difficult at times. I draw inspiration from this gentleman, Ezra Meeker, who was born in 1830 and made his first trip, of course, in an ox cart. And he made another trip by ox cart across the United States, two of them, as a matter of fact. And then he had an automobile, went on a national speaking tour, and he actually flew to Dayton, Ohio in 1924. Mr. Ezra Meeker, quite a fellow. Anton Westgard was a Norwegian immigrant, and he was largely responsible for a lot of establishment of the early named roads. He started out as a railroad engineer, survey engineer, and then was hired by groups like AAA, Automobile Club of Southern California, to map automotive roads to like places like the Grand Canyon, things of that nature. One of his was Trail to Sunset. It started at the same eastern terminus of what would become Route 66 in Chicago and ran diagonally across the country, connected the ocean to ocean highway in Yuma, Arizona. About 1912, that would be incorporated into the National Old Trails Road, which ran from Maryland to California. Excuse me. Got a little bit of an allergy thing. I think I'm allergic to work. A little perspective, though, on how little things changed, why we needed a U.S. highway system. Uh, if you'll recall, when Dr. Jackson drove across the United States, he did this in about 63 days. Well, fast forward to 1915, when Edsel Ford made a trip west with his college buddies from Detroit to the Panama Pacific Exposition in California. A large part of that trip was over the National Old Trails Road, which was the predecessor to Route 66 in the Southwest. And you can see here, he drove 156 miles in one day and considered it a good day's run. He only broke one spring on the struts and only had a couple of flat tires. uh, surprisingly, a lot of women were taking the road at this time, and Florence Lawrence, the early silver screen, one of the first superstars in movies, was automotive obsessed. And we had a lot of women that were pioneers with inventions with automobiles. You can credit women for things like windshield wipers, brake lights, turn signals. Uh, but the allure of the road, this became the thing for the rich and famous to do, was cross-country road trips, especially in the teens. One of the surprisings is Miss Manor, Emily Post. She made the trip in 1916 from New York to the coast. Her book, By Motor to the Golden Gate, is a great read, and I'm glad it's been reprinted by Amazon. You can find copies. The National Old Trails Road was just one of many of the named highways. We had the Lincoln Highway, Ocean to Ocean Highway, Pikes Peak Highway, on and on and on. And it became very confusing. But of particular interest to the Route 66 story is the National Old Trails Road. Initially, this, as I said, followed the Trail to Sunset, running diagonally across the country. And then in 1913, a group of businessmen, including Thomas Devine from Kingman, Arizona, owner of the Hotel Beale, father of character actor Andy Devine, he and some businessmen went to the convention, National Trails Road Convention in Kansas City, and petitioned to have the National Trails Road rerouted across northern Arizona and across the Mojave Desert following the railroad. And two arguments were very strong and worked well with tourism. You had established hotels and restaurants along the railroad. One argument that was not made, but Emily Post would be well aware of a few years later. When you destroyed your automobile on these horrific roads, you could load the remains on the train and ship them home or to your destination. Excuse me. We uh, we started this initially. We were talking about adapting to change and how fast the world was changing. The automobile, much like the internet in later years, would be a catalyst for rather dramatic and rapid societal evolution. As an example, in 1909, 828,000 horse-drawn vehicles manufactured and only 125,000 automobiles. Then you flip that 20 years, everything changed. But look behind the scenes of that. Think about all the multi-generational blacksmith shops and wagon manufacturing firms and harness makers that were made irrelevant in a 20-year period of time. This takes us to Route 66, that was established in officially as one of the first U.S. highway systems in 1925-26. Interestingly enough, my pa always told me better to fill your head with useless knowledge than no knowledge at all. Initially, in the US 66 was designated US 60, but it was a political compromise was needed to get the U.S. highway system approved, resulted in it being renumbered as US 66. But even just because we put up signs on the old highways, it didn't mean roads necessarily improved. It would be 1936, 37 before Route 66 was fully paved from end to end. But Route 66 was billed as the main street of America because it literally was. It funneled traffic through communities, and that was an economic driver of on before this time unprecedented and transformed communities, large and small. Interestingly enough, Cyrus Avery, the fellow behind, deemed the father of Route 66, he'd been involved in a lot of the early pioneer systems like the Ozark Trails highway system, so he would have been well aware of this. But some of the marketing campaigns, Cyrus Avery in early 1927 created some cooperative partnerships that led to the establishment of the U.S. Highway 66 Association. And they had two primary goals, marketing Route 66 and lobbying to have the highway paved. And one of the things they started marketing the highway as is the main street of America. That marketing and advertising campaign dated to 1913. Judge Lowe of the National Old Trails Road Association had used that same slogan. But Route 66 was opportunity made manifest. Anybody with an idea could make a living on Route 66. You could put up a gas station, you could build a motel, you could come up with a quirky attraction, and it created a new source of income that was vitally important, especially in rural communities. And that proved to be a lifesaver, especially during the hard times of the economic crash of the 1930s, the Great Depression. When we think of Route 66 today, we have a tendency to think of it in the context of neon and tail fins. Ah, the glory days of Route 66. But that all depends on what color you were. Because Route 66, like the country, well up into the 1960s, was very, very segregated. The Green Book became a vital component in travel. Victor Green had come up with that idea to come up with a Green Book that black travelers could use and find lodging, even gas stations that would serve African American travelers. Route 66 was also deemed Bloody 66. The highway could never, it was in a continuous state of evolution, but it could never keep up with the ever increasing flow of traffic. The narrow bridges, the narrow roads with no shoulders, the increase in speeds when everybody who had Model A Fords was driving 45, that was one thing. But by the mid 1930s, you had fast and powerful automobiles, plus you had farm equipment, trucks. It was a nightmare. And the number of horrendous accidents increased exponentially through the 1930s, 1940s, and in the 1950s, those tragedies really escalated. Route 66, a few things attest to its popularity more than the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66. And this is one reason the road is so well known all over the world. It's the most recorded song in history. Most everybody has done a version of this. Chuck Berry, Polish polka bands, the Perry Como, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. There's been television shows, books, movies, magazine articles. A little bit of trivia for you. The TV show Route 66, only a couple of episodes were actually filmed on the highway, but it fueled that sense of adventure that comes from the Great American Road Trip, especially on Route 66. It's considered the ultimate road trip today. It is a grand adventure. There are tour companies based in several countries that specialize in Route 66 tours. It's pretty astounding again when you consider it's a highway that doesn't exist. Route 66 today, it's been described, Michael Waltz called it America's linear community. It's like America's longest small town, but it's much, much more. It's a museum with an overlay of Disneyland. It's a chain of living time capsules. That little food court there with all the neon signs is often overlooked even by Route 66 travelers. That is Grand Central Market, downtown LA, on near 7th and Broadway, the original western terminus of Route 66, which is also the historic theater district. It's been there since 1917, and there's almost 100 years of neon signage on display, not to mention food and drink from every corner of the world. And so, as a result, I think Route 66 has become known as the quintessential American experience. It is stories of immigrants and Native Americans. It's the Great Depression. It's serial killers, gangsters. It is Renaissance, economic boom. World's only EV museum is being established on Route 66. The highway continues to evolve. And it's really easy to forget sometimes as you're driving this that it was a highway. It was the main street of America. And so it was in all glory days. Uh, but it's always been about the people. That's it. The colorful characters, the people who made the shops that opened, the people you meet today, the passionate people that are working to preserve things, the people who are managing businesses, the people who are operating tour companies. It's really, I think one of the drivers is we live in a pretty cold and personal world right now, and Route 66 is real. It's tangible. You interact with people. You have pie and coffee in a diner, and you get to talking with the owner, and you meet other people who've traveled the road. It's also endangered. For example, more than 95% of the bridges are scheduled for demolition or replacement. And there's fewer than 5% of authentic Route 66 hotels serve their original purpose. And when it comes to properties listed in the Negro Modus Green Book, it's estimated that less than 1% survive. So I'd like to encourage you, especially as we close in on the centennial, rediscover America with a road trip on the main street of America. Shall we let the adventure begin? I'd like to close up with this. We've come full circle. Well, this big adventure started with the bicycle, and now bicycle tourism on Route 66 has become an entire industry in its own. Hey, I want to thank everyone who joined me this morning. I hope you found this marginally entertaining and interesting and informative. More importantly, I hope it inspired a road trip or two. At Jim Hinckley's America, what we do is share America's story and inspire road trips by telling people where to go. Join us on Sunday mornings, 7 o'clock Arizona time on Podbean for Coffee with Jim. It's a virtual diner where folks gather. And we always have interesting and fascinating guests like Jackie Dunn with the Model A Ford Club of America, or uh, John Pageant, the acclaimed documentary film producer, Reese Martin, president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association. If you miss the live programs, no problem. We archive them and on most major uh, podcast platforms, and you'll find an embedded player on the Jim Hinckley's America website. My friends, until we meet on the road, adios.